Timothy Good has researched the UFO subject for over 40 years. His first book, Above Top Secret, The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up, published in 1987, is regarded as the definitive work on this subject. Having read his latest book, Need to Know, UFOs, the Military and Intelligence, I asked Timothy for an interview to discuss this very real subject. I started by asking, how did an interest in aircraft turn into an interest in UFOs?
That's a good question, Richard. I've always been fascinated, for as long as I can remember, by aircraft and space travel. So when in 1955 I was given a book on the subject of UFOs, I was immediately hooked, because this book by Major Donald Keyhoe described reports by airline pilots, air traffic controllers, frequently confirmed by radar, of course, and military pilots. And these reports obviously were taken seriously by the military and intelligence agencies from the outset. So I got hooked because of that.
And so what was the reason why you actually chose that particular book? Because it obviously wasn't about aircraft, it was about flying saucers.
Yeah, well, this cousin came over from the States once, who's related on my mother's side, and he knew of my interest in aircraft. So he said, "Timothy, you like planes? Do you know about flying saucers?" And I said, "No." And so he gave me this book, written by Major Donald Keyhoe, which, and I haven't looked back since that time, quite honestly. And I started doing my own research, serious research, in about 1961.
Okay. And most ufologists are hell-bent on full disclosure, and that really is their holy grail. I saw you interviewed a little while ago on TV, and I thought, this man isn't really hell-bent on disclosure. That's not your agenda. I felt that what are your feelings about disclosure? Would you welcome a full disclosure? And could you just briefly explain to me because your books are exposing the cover-up, so what's motivating you to get that information out?
Based on what I've learnt, full disclosure would be disastrous on several fronts. And I have been convinced, certainly for the last 7 years, that gradual disclosure, which I believe is the official agenda, if you can call it that, because relatively few people in governments have the faintest idea what's happening, as you know. Really, it's got to be gradual. That is what I have been led to believe. And based on what I know, I don't know everything, I think that is the wisest way forward.
Okay. And do you think that the releasing of the MOD files in March 2008 and October 2000, do you think that's the start of that type of process, or is that just a coincidence?
I think in a way it could be. I really do feel, because at the very least it's generating a tremendous amount of media interest each time these documents are released by the batch. As you know, since the Freedom of Information Act in 2004, the MOD has been accelerating the normal process, which used to be every 30 years, every 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, never, whatever, of officially releasing files. But they've been accelerating the process. I find it extraordinary that in the media, all these sort of headlines, top secret files finally revealed. Well, in the last few years, no top secret files have been released, and very, very few secret files. Certainly, Project Condign was an example about 4 years ago of a UK eyes only secret document, classified like that mostly, 465 odd pages. But generally, I would say 95% are just confidential. That is the classification, which is very lowly.
Yeah.
And I was amused to see in the papers my own reports sent to the Ministry of Defence, like the famous case of Alfred Berthoud, the fisherman who encountered a landed UFO in Aldershot, which a case I investigated thoroughly, and I first published it in Above Top Secret. Right. Prior to that, I sent the report to my full investigation to the Ministry of Defence. And of course, this is trumpeted by the media as top secret files from the Ministry of Defence. Here's their report on the Alfred Berthoud case. I mean...
And it's been in your book for years and years.
Yes.
And just to go back, just to press you on one point that you said that you didn't think full disclosure would be wise because it would it would be problematic. Now, can you elaborate on that? I mean, what is it? What secrets are they holding that the masses would not be able to cope with?
Well, I'll give you a few examples. Okay. First of all, we're not just, when you talk about aliens coming here, we're not talking about one group. I know from my own connections that it's accepted by some governments that up to 50 or more species have been coming here over the years, and that's not so outrageous. Essentially, they're all humanoid, but there are variations. Let's just take a look at the abduction phenomenon, for starters. What is the true purpose of the abduction scenario? The aliens who are, and there are several types of aliens involved in abductions, not just the little greys as they're referred to as. There are other types, more human types have been involved in abducting. The famous Herbert Schirmer case, for example, in Nebraska, very human type beings, very similar to Homo sapiens, certain differences, but then there are racial differences here, were involved. And I think, from what I've been told, certainly the so-called grey types, the ones with the sort of almond-shaped eyes and everything, their motives are not what they indicate and what they tell people. Okay. There is a hybridization program. Hybridization is the name of the game. They've been doing that since the 1950s, as far as it seems. And I think it's diminished to an extent nowadays. That's the reports I get from around the world. But I think probably a conservative estimate would be that hundreds of thousands of people have actually been abducted. That's my opinion. Now the question is why? Well, what I have learnt regarding that scenario is that the purpose is indeed for hybridization, but it's not for our benefit. Yeah. It can be argued that it's for our benefit, but what I'm told is that it's for their own agenda, which is takeover of this planet. Now that's kind of disturbing, if it's true. I don't know it's true, I'm just saying what I have learnt. And this is obviously very, very disturbing, and apparently the hybridization program, half alien, half human, whatever the proportions are, is to make us acquiescent, less violent. I think I can see very good reasons for that. But at the same time, is it going to make us more acquiescent to what they want to do, which is to take over this planet? They need this planet. I'm sure there are several spacefaring races who need this planet. Earth is unique. Astrophysicists are absolutely right about this. Earth is unique, not obviously in the Milky Way, but for quite a ways around. And I think for donkey's years, it's a very attractive prospect to people looking for alternative planets to have bases on them or whatever.
Some people would say that the decision to keep this subject played down, covered up, is more to do with people maintaining their own power, people who are in positions of power, i.e. the oil cartels perhaps,
sure.
People who make armaments. You know, we wouldn't need that if we suddenly realised there was a threat which was massively more capable than our own. So some people would say that it's more selfish and greedy reasons why it's covered up, rather than the the reason that you gave.
Okay, it is certainly one of the principal reasons. There's no question about that. There are power factions involved here. There's absolutely no question. Vested interests very deeply entrenched and have been since contact was established. I'm firmly convinced that communication with select groups of military and intelligence people, scientific intelligence people, very restricted, specialized groups that first began in 1943.
So this is the communication between aliens and certain parts of the military. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's as far as the military. But I think that human beings in general have had communications with different types of aliens for hundreds of thousands of years.
So staying on that subject then, the MJ-12 group, which you list in your book, set up by Truman in 1947, do you think when he set that group up, and I find it fascinating that there are no political figures in that group, they're all military and other types of people,
Yes.
which is quite undemocratic really, in my view, that they reported to him on a need-to-know basis, so he basically could
Sure.
keep that very, very well secret.
It's always been like that, a very tight ship, and the first people to get involved were the nuclear physicists, for example, people who dealt with the Manhattan Project, because they were the ones who were used to dealing with compartmentalized information, which was a process initiated by General Groves at the time of the Manhattan Project,
Right.
specifically for the Manhattan Project.
So when Truman made that decision after Roswell, do you think he was getting his orders from somebody else then? Or was this an American president just on his own bat saying, right, this subject needs to be covered up?
I don't know, but I think increasingly mostly the military is in charge of this operation, to the extent that a lot of people in the intelligence community are not part of the process.
Okay, now I just mentioned the Roswell event there. Now I read of another event in your latest book, which is the Aztec UFO incident, where a completely intact craft was recovered.
Yep.
Would you care to give a little bit of
Yes,
detail on that? Because to me
sure.
it's possibly more significant than Roswell.
Yes, this took place in Aztec, New Mexico in March of 1948, when a 100-foot diameter disc actually came down in a sort of controlled crash landing. The only damage was to one of the portholes, which looked as if it was either an entry hole from a shell from the military, which is quite possible, because my information is a number of these craft have actually been shot down. We can talk about that a bit later. But no, I'm convinced that craft was almost certainly shot down, and it was in perfect condition. There were at least a dozen small bodies inside, but they had been, or appeared to have been burnt. There was no fire involved, but because apparently the atmosphere just simply wasn't right for them, and this has been confirmed by a number of sources. It's thanks to Scott Ramsey, fantastic research on this Aztec case, that he managed to interview a few old-timers, and he got a few deathbed confessions from people who had been involved in the case. There's a lot of people, and some names have been published, and he's hopefully going to produce a book just on the Aztec case, and we should look forward to that.
Okay. The one question which cropped up in my mind when I read that, Philip Corso is known to have managed the extraction of technology from the Roswell UFO. So do you think he would have had his hands on the Aztec UFO as well? Or?
Together with General Trudeau.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think
it all depends?
If I was in his shoes, I would say, well, I don't want the crashed one. I want the whole one.
Well, maybe everything's on a need-to-know basis. You know, maybe Trudeau and Corso did not have a need to know about the Aztec one, which has always been far more sensitive than the Roswell one. The Roswell one, they learnt some stuff. Sure, they got a lot of materials and some bodies, but the Aztec was an absolute gift from heaven, literally. I mean, incredible. And the technology, that's 1948, and according to my understanding, the Americans have had that technology for quite some time, to the extent that they have developed some discs and other type craft.
I was going to ask you about technology, because a lot of the UFOs seem to fit into a category where they're between 30 and 100 feet in diameter. They're a disc-shaped, and often they have rotating rings around the edge, sometimes counter-rotating rings. And even from our own physics, we know that if you rotate a piece of metal in a strong magnetic field, you get an extremely high electric current, which I'm led to believe can produce an anti-gravity effect. The homopolar generator Do you think that's why the craft are the shape they are in order to generate the anti-gravity technology?
Well, the problem there is that there are plenty of craft which aren't of the classic flying saucer shape, but certainly I think that that could well apply. I've got in my book Alien Base cases going back to the 1920s, encounters with beings, with flying craft, and they talk about rotating materials inside the craft which nullify the effects of gravity.
Right, okay. And you mention in your book two different groups, one in the UK, the Flying Saucers Working Party, and another one called the Robertson Panel in the US. And these were groups which were set up specifically to investigate UFO cases. Now, you make out that they were actually almost doing the opposite of what they were set up for,
sure.
which was to play down the subject.
Definitely, which was in fact why there was such close liaison between the Americans and the Brits engaged with the...
And another thing I found fascinating was that in I think it was 52 when UFOs were sighted over Washington DC, Churchill became interested in it, and he asked the question of this Flying Saucers Working Party, and they'd basically said, well, there's nothing to it,
Prime Minister. All the unexplained reports have subsequently been explained, and pay no attention.
What intrigues me then is you say that you think that the Flying Saucers Working Party were influenced by the Americans.
Definitely.
Who told them to play it down.
Definitely.
So that didn't come through a political channel then, through Churchill.
No.
So there are elements within the Secret Services. So the Americans are in control of elements within the British government without the permission of our Prime Minister.
Definitely.
Okay.
It's always been like that. I'll never forget what a very good friend of mine told me, who was a former deputy chief of MI6. He's now deceased. And I asked what the connection was with, how come the Americans seem to know so much, and tremendous high secrecy, and the British government always denying everything. And his words to me were, Timothy, I think you'll find we leave that to the Americans.
Right.
And that's what I have found. The Americans are in control. Now, also Air Marshal Sir Peter Horsley, who worked for Prince Philip and the Queen for 7 years at Buckingham Palace, during that period, 1954, he had a 2-hour meeting with an extraterrestrial being, he claims, and I believe him because I knew him, arranged for him via a British Army general. And he was, in any event, very interested in the subject, which led to the meeting with this alleged extraterrestrial. But when he worked in the operations room in the Ministry of Defence and dealt with the UFO situation to a degree, liaising with the Americans, he asked to gain access. He had, at that time, Sir Peter Horsley had, for example, top secret atomic clearance. So he could discuss nuclear secrets with the Americans. But when he asked about the UFOs, they said, sorry, Peter.
And how do you think that's come to be? Why are we the poodle? Why is our Secret Services the poodle to their Secret Services? When did that initiate in your mind?
Because the United States is the most powerful nation on Earth.
And they do this
it doesn't just apply to the UFO situation. The United States is in charge of our deployment of nuclear weapons.
Not in great detail in your book, but you mention underground bases.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the most notable one is the Dulce facility. Do you believe there's a base in Dulce in New Mexico?
I think regarding the Dulce base, there was a lot of red herrings being thrown out by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Okay. So much disinformation. I don't know. All I can tell you is that I did hire a plane. I didn't fly it, but to overfly the site. Mm-hmm. Didn't learn much from that. I have been to the area. Certainly there were a lot of animal mutilations going on at that time in the area, but in my book, Unearthly Disclosure, I have revealed actual alleged locations of alien bases.
Yes.
So, I've been quite specific. There was one in Virginia, for example, one in New Mexico. the Manzano nuclear weapons complex. There's a huge one, maybe two, in the Pacific Ocean.
Underneath the ocean?
Underneath the ocean, yes.
Okay, and just to go back to the Secret Services...
And many other, if I can say, you know, in many other areas as well, in the Caribbean. There are quite a number. In Australia, there are quite a number.
Okay.
And this is not something that can readily be admitted by governments.
Okay. And just to go back to we were talking about MI6 and things like that. You mentioned that you think that a lot of the intelligence with regards to UFOs in the UK is held by GCHQ.
Definitely. Because, you know, GCHQ works hand in glove with America's National Security Agency. And they do share quite a lot of information, and it seems about the UFO situation as well. I have tried to get information from one or two people, but they're absolutely tight-lipped about it.
So do you think, because obviously whenever there's UFO reports, they all go to the MOD, and so do you think there's contact between the MOD and GCHQ?
It would depend. It would depend on the department in the Ministry of Defence.
Right. Okay.
You see, what I've learnt, and I learnt a long time ago from two reliable sources, is that the most sensitive work on UFOs was done by the Provost, the Royal Air Force Provost and Security Services. And they are the equivalent of America's Office of Special Investigations. They deal with counterintelligence, policing, breaches of security and things like that. And they are renowned as being among the most efficient counterintelligence agencies in the world.
Okay.
Provost and Security Services. Right. And as you may know, I got arrested for poking around Rudloe Manor. In Wiltshire, where the headquarters of the Provost and Security Services was located at the time in the 1980s. They've moved now.
Okay, so that sounds like a privately run thing, is it, or is that?
No.
Right.
It's part of the Royal Air Force.
Right. Okay.
But it's the actual lodger unit is buried or was buried within what's called the Flying Complaints Flight. I have some interviews with people who were involved in the Provost and Security Services who had top secret clearances, but they could never get near the UFO.
Right.
That was the most restricted.
So you think that particular group has a lot of the knowledge?
They certainly did. I can't tell now if it's been passed on. There are other groups like Naval Intelligence. Nothing, as far as I know, has ever been released by the British government. Maybe something about Operation Mainbrace in the early 1950s, but I think they have a very deep involvement as well. That's my guess. Certainly the United States Naval Intelligence people do.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Lord Clancy in your book, and information which
Clancarty, yeah.
Oh, is that how it's pronounced?
Yes, sorry, it's all right, yes.
He gave information on the Eisenhower meeting.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that, on the 1954, is it Edwards Air Force Base?
Edwards Air Force Base, which was then top secret for top secret aircraft. There was a meeting arranged in February 1954. I don't know any more. I do know some things that happened as a consequence of that. But there was a meeting with Eisenhower and some top officials, including the American head of the Catholic Church, Cardinal McIntyre, I think, and a few other high-ranking people named who they have been named in one famous letter, which I published in Alien Liaison. I think it definitely did happen. My information was that there was a follow-up arrangement to transfer technology. This was given to me by another source, and a meeting, I don't know if Eisenhower was involved at this particular meeting, but I know that some scientists went out to a certain desert location and were taken out by some CIA guys.
And it's alleged that they demonstrated that their ship could become invisible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apparently to Eisenhower's tremendous embarrassment.
Okay.
And he said that they said they wanted to educate Earth people. They were very concerned about the nuclear build-up and everything. And Eisenhower was quite shocked by this. And he said, I don't think we're ready for that yet. And in the end, apparently they agreed. And they said, well, we're not going to stop being around, you know. And
And there are, you know, many examples in your book of the capabilities of UFOs. For example, entire craft and crew going missing altogether. Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. They have the capability of just absorbing aircraft, spacecraft, whatever, on board their giant carriers.
Okay.
With technology. They have the technology.
Okay, and we were talking about the abduction phenomena earlier. You've touched on that. Have you? Do you investigate people who self-claimed abductees? Have you?
Definitely, quite a few people, yes. And I myself have had abduction-type experiences. I will not say I was abducted.
Okay.
But, for example, I have experienced night paralysis, so-called, on probably several hundred occasions. In the 1980s and 1990s, and together with my girlfriend, who was living with me for 10 years or so at that time, she herself had similar experiences at the same time. And I can tell you, it was quite disturbing. I never saw anything, but there was just this tremendous vibration in the solar plexus, accompanied by increasing paralysis, which I always managed to shake off. Only on 2 occasions was that happening in connection with a visual image. And the last one was the most, I would say, disturbing for me. That was only about 3 years ago.
Okay.
When I know what time I went to sleep, which was 5 to 1.
Yeah.
I put my book down. The next thing I knew, I was somewhere else. I was beside a road. I could feel the cold air on my face. I could see the sky. In the sky, lying as I seemed to be lying half like this, half sitting up from the ground level. In the sky was a grey triangle against the black, dark blue sky. Very absolutely looked like it was glued in the sky with white lights all the way along the edges of the triangle. And suddenly I felt that same paralysis feeling that I get when I'm normally conscious or woken up by it, and I fought it again. I fought it. I refused to accept this. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in my room. I looked at the time, and 10 minutes had elapsed. All I can say is that it seemed real to me. It could have been a dream, but it seemed real.
Okay. Yeah. And what about evidence of ETs among us?
Well, I think since the earliest times, some extraterrestrials have been living among us and either have established bases here or have just been living here, because from what we are told by people claiming contacts, people I have found very honest, people going way back who had contact experiences. I've spoken to people who had contacts with ETs in the 1920s and 1930s. And I'm talking about the more human types here, highly telepathic, more human beings, and they say that we are genetically linked and that there was hybridization, not just one race, but several races were involved and have been for millennia. And we are a hybridized species.
So that links in with people like Zecharia Sitchin's theory. I mean, have you got a view on his particular theory about the Anunnaki?
Well, I haven't read all his books. I have them, and I think he's a scholar. And I think basically, yes, I go along with the fact that they came here a long time ago. Certainly, I mean, I think he says something like, you say
400,000, possibly. I'm not sure.
I mean, there are others that I've spoken to, certainly maybe different races involved, who say that about 14,000 years ago, there was a race of beings who had bases on Venus and Mars, and Mars began to lose its atmosphere, and they eventually made their way to Earth. So they colonized Earth at the time of very primitive humans, and they genetically upgraded us through hybridization, apparently.
In your book, you mention a witness who witnessed an ET, was taken on board their craft, and was told that in the alien society there
Yes.
was no need for money.
This was Sid Patrick in California in 1965. He's still alive, by the way. I find his one of the most convincing experiences, and he was investigated by the military. I've described the questions the military asked him, and one of them was, we don't want you to mention this, and particularly, you know, that they had no money in their society and everything. And when we talk about they don't have any money society, I mean, from what I've gathered from other sources, it doesn't mean to say you get something for nothing.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like...
It's not a utopia, you know, in terms of you just grab what you like.
Yeah, it sounds almost like an extreme socialism or even communism, perhaps.
It might sound like that to the Americans, yes.
Okay, which is why they probably don't want to mention it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I have heard other contactees say that.
Yes.
That
Yes.
we are the only race which actually has money, and it's used as basically as a control mechanism.
I wouldn't know about that, but, you know, we need some form of exchange and credit.
Yeah.
I mean, some of us get on very well without any money at all, but manage to spend billions on credit cards.
And a lot of people think, if I just ask you about the Illuminati, I mean, do you think, because the answers that you've given me so far, you're saying that it's broadly the military that's in control of the information, and it's the military that's in control of the cover-up, shall we say, and whether we're going to all find out about it. Now, what about people who aren't involved in military, but who perhaps have positions of power? Many people believe that the cover-up is being perpetrated by other families, family dynasties who are a part of the Illuminati. What's your view on that?
There's something to it. I think some people, I mean, what do you mean by the Illuminati? I mean, there's
secret societies like
okay.
the Freemasons or the Round Table, and etc.
No, certainly not the Round Table, I can tell you that. But Masons, I don't know. I very much doubt whether there might, at the very top, you know, if you're 33rd degree or something, have some knowledge about it. But I think it's certainly true that there are some very powerful people who may be associated with Masons, for example, or the Bilderberger groups who are in possession of this knowledge and might not want the mass of humanity to learn about it. That is quite possible.
Okay. And do you think that we call it the cover-up, do you think that's actually perpetrated by an alien force then? Or do you think that's purely human beings?
That's a very good question, but I myself think, well, the two things I'd like to say about that is that, first of all, from what I've gathered, many of the aliens don't want us to know what they are doing here. And that's kind of understandable, and they could take retaliatory action if, say, those few people in the United States government wanted to start talking. And it's quite possible they've done that already. So it's not in their best interests.
Many people believe that the cover-up isn't purely perpetrated by the military or perhaps even the Illuminati, that there is a link with aliens who are in control of the disclosure or non-disclosure, shall we say. Do you think that people are receiving, or the power structure at the top of it is some kind of alien force?
I do indeed think that is the case, yes. And there's also corporate interests involved, huge sums, billions of money in the black budget is involved in this subject, and it's all covered under weaponry.
So how would, I mean, this is probably going to be a really difficult question, but how would that communication take place between, would it be in an office, just two people sitting, an alien sitting talking to someone in the UN or something like that? Or?
Well, probably not the United Nations, but certainly there have been meetings in offices, certainly involving the more human type that, you know, pass among us and are spies, if you like. Those meetings have taken place. Other meetings, I'm told, have been take place at the bases.
Okay. And some witnesses...
And that involves both of the basic types of aliens who communicate with us.
Do you think an American president, if he found out what was going on, let's say Barack Obama gained some of this knowledge, do you think he would have the power to go for full disclosure?
I learnt, for example, that President Kennedy in 1961, 1962 requested observation of the alien bodies recovered in some of these events, crash retrieval cases. His request was granted, and as I've written in Need to Know, he was taken on Air Force One to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, and he viewed the bodies. I don't know much more than that, except it was a top secret mission, and it was headed by General Godfrey T. McHugh. And interestingly, from another source, I learnt that General McHugh replaced one of the principal military attendees at Dallas on 22nd of November 1963 at the last minute. So you could put two and two together and make 22, but I don't know. I think Kennedy was assassinated
Linked
to the fact that he probably wanted to tell the public. You may recall that 3 tramps were arrested near the grassy knoll, suspected of maybe having something to do with the assassination. I think they were eventually released without charge, but one of those so-called tramps was none other than Fred Chrisman, who was a counterintelligence agent for the CIA and with the United States Air Force, who had specialized in the UFO problem.
Right. Okay, so we have a possible link there then.
Definitely.
Okay. And just to go back to, I want to ask you about some of the other American presidents. Nixon, for example, is alleged to have witnessed the same bodies, perhaps, that Kennedy did. Is that true?
I think it's quite likely. He saw them, well, at least he took his friend Jackie Gleason to view them at Homestead Air Force Base, also in Florida. But from what I was told by my source, they moved them around Air Force bases, and whereas Kennedy had seen them at Tyndall Air Force Base at a special medical facility.
Okay, and other presidents, you think?
I think Reagan was knowledgeable. For example, I know that George Bush Sr. was extremely knowledgeable on the subject, partly because he was head of CIA, of course. But I think also he'd had, he just has very good contacts anyway.
And what about President Clinton? Because I did hear that he did task someone to go and have a look at Area 51 or something.
He did. Well, no, I think Clinton asked his, I think it was his chief of staff, to look into what the government knew about the UFO situation and about the Kennedy assassination. And apparently he was frustrated in getting the answers that he was looking for. And from what I've gathered, the people in charge of the so-called Alien Liaison Project, as I call it, don't look kindly on presidents who don't have a military background.
So the Alien Liaison Project is liaising with the military and the president.
Not just military. There's definite corporate involvement. Okay. Huge sums of money are involved, more money than on anything else. A lot of these projects are black budget programs buried within, for example, the nuclear industry, nuclear weapons, and other programs. There's nothing about UFOs or aliens you're going to find. And it's interesting in this connection that in 1993, Ben Rich, who headed the so-called Skunk Works, which developed the stealth fighter plane years ago now.
Infamous Area 51, or near?
Well, certainly the test flights were done from there and other locations. But in 1993, 2 years before he died, Ben Rich made some very interesting statements at the University of California Department of Engineering. And 2 friends of mine, colleagues in UFO research, were present. And one of the things Ben Rich said was that he was asked about the UFO situation, and he said a lot of these projects are buried in very, very compartmentalized black budget things. Huge sums of money are involved, and it would take an act of God to get this out, to get the technology out, to benefit humanity. And he confirmed, he said, we now have the technology to go to the stars. That was in 1993. Okay. And he's made other comments confirming the existence of both extraterrestrial UFOs and what he sometimes referred to as UFO unfunded opportunities, which meant Earth-developed spacecraft, which the Americans have and have had for quite some time, just to confuse the whole UFO issue.
You see, I envision a world where all of this technology is known about, it's all introduced into the commercial world, we all have free energy devices, and we can all come and go at our leisure. And I know it sounds like a dream, but that's possible.
You're an idealist, Richard.
You think so?
I think so. And, well, can you imagine, first of all, would you want this technology falling into the hands of terrorists or people who, you know, there are many, many very primitive countries on this planet?
Mm-hmm. See, a lot of people would say that the answer to that question is that we need to grow spiritually with our technology. In other words, we need to be more civilized as we become more technologicalized.
But Richard, that's an ideal. That's not the fact.
I mean, we could have blown ourselves apart in the Cold War, couldn't we? But we didn't.
We still could.
Each side had the knowledge that the other had total destruction, so therefore
yes.
It didn't happen. I mean, a terrorist could get a bomb in a nuclear bomb in a suitcase and probably wipe out, you know,
millions of people. Certainly, yes.
That's still
well, it still could. Don't count on it, and don't count on there not being a third world war. It's quite possible. Things go wrong. But I'm encouraged by the fact that on numerous occasions, both Russians and Americans experienced interference at ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile sites,
right. So you think
on many occasions. Yeah. And they have also shown the ability to launch those rockets if they chose, or to shut them down so that they couldn't be launched. So they are in charge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And I've got another question here that intrigued me. You mentioned that in 1950, Chief of Defence Staff Mountbatten had quite a lot of knowledge about the UFO subject.
He did.
And can you elaborate a little bit on that? I mean,
well,
he knew somebody.
Well, as I say, he later became he was interested, together with the Duke of Edinburgh, in the UFO subject from the very early days, from the time of the first flying saucer reports, as they were then called. And obviously, it sort of got his interest even more when, I think it was in 1954, one of his servants reported actually encountering a landed craft, or a craft which hovered very low in wintertime, and a sort of platform lowered from it, and a being was seen, and they were and he was so frightened he fell off his bike, and Mountbatten immediately launched an investigation, went out there, saw where he'd been wheeling his bike, riding his bike, and had fallen off at that point and everything. So he believed him.
Okay. And the question which cropped up in my mind was, does today's Chief of Defence Staff have the same knowledge that Mountbatten had?
Well, Lord Hill Norton was former Chief of Defence Staff and head of the head of the NATO Military Committee. He certainly did not have a need to know, and I believe him. I found that incomprehensible, but he said maybe, if at a different time, if something big was going on, I would have had a need to know, but there wasn't, and he wasn't Chief of the Defence Staff for all that long.
Okay, and if you look at the MOD's hierarchy in the armed forces, I mean, how far down do you have to go, or where are the?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even very high-ranking generals, a four-star general, say, wouldn't necessarily have a need to know, and it might, but someone of a lower rank, say a 2-star general, would. It works like that. It does not follow the normal rules.
And the method by which they make these people keep this secret, can you elaborate on that? Is it threats, or is it golden
It certainly can be. It certainly can be threats. Yes, I mean they're taken regularly to a sensitive. If they have what so-called above top secret clearance, which is top secret code word, which is an accessed group. Okay. So you have, in addition to top secret clearance, which is the highest, you're then compartmented in a small group, and you certainly can't talk about that information. And they are periodically taken to what's called a sensitive compartmented information facility and reminded of their oaths and so forth. And certainly they can be threatened.
Okay, and we were talking about astronauts. If we just briefly touch on astronauts, we mentioned the Apollo 11 landings. Do you believe? What's your view of the first?
Regarding Apollo 11, we now know from Buzz Aldrin that during the flight out to the moon, they were accompanied by a bell-shaped craft, and they all looked at it through a monocular through the cabin of Apollo 11. So that's been confirmed, and it was confirmed also by, I believe, Dr. David Baker, who was the Apollo 11 senior scientist on this program documentary, which was shown about 4 years ago, I think, Apollo 11, The Untold Story. Also, from a friend of mine, a former lady who worked in MI6, she met Neil Armstrong in Italy, and he confirmed to her, she'd overheard a conversation of him talking to a German doctor at a NASA conference, and then she confronted Armstrong with this information, and he admitted, yes, there were craft on the moon when they landed, and they were very frightened by it, and they felt threatened.
Okay, and you think that's the big secret, basically, about the not the fact that they didn't land on the moon, because some people believe that. I mean,
they did land on the moon, believe me. You can see some of the instruments on the moon if you have a powerful enough telescope, and you can even communicate with them. That's not to say that NASA doesn't doctor photographs taken on the moon. I mean, if you look at Vogue magazine or these expensive glosses, do you not think some of the pictures are doctored to make people look better? Any sort of spots or things can be, how it's all done. I mean, so a lot of the moon pictures were made to look, more jazzy.
Okay. One final question. I think I've heard you answer this question on Edge Media about the reptilian alien being. You're not convinced of the existence of a reptilian? I
think there are some, but I think they're a rare species. Very definitely. There are numerous types of extraterrestrial, invariably bipedal, 2 arms, a trunk. But the reptilians seem to me, I think a lot of people, they suddenly became fashionable.
Right.
I remember about 6 years ago in the United States, and suddenly everybody was being abducted by reptilians. I remember that.
I mean, one witness, Clifford Stone, he's confirmed that he believed there are reptilians. And
I find Clifford Stone very dubious, in my opinion. Yes.
Okay. And would you care to elaborate on that? I mean, we don't have to show that if you don't want me to.
No, I don't want to get personal about people, but he's always there. He always knows this and that. You don't talk about it. He wouldn't be alive if he were talking about half the things he's talking about.
Right.
He claims to know this and that. He knows of much too much. There's no way he'd know all those bits relating to everything.
And
claims to have known all about the Rendlesham Forest case and everything like that, and I fell for it back when I wrote my first book. I think or maybe even Beyond Top Secret, 1996 book that, I cited him in connection with some comment about that he'd been involved and he knew about what was covered up and everything.
But you don't think?
I don't think he did.
Right.
No, I don't think he's reliable. There are a lot I could talk about, but I don't think are reliable. You have to be it's a minefield out there, full of disinformation, a lot of charlatans, a lot of egomaniacs.
Okay, and what about the future? I mean, we've talked about disclosure. Do you think we will get disclosure?
I think, to an extent, disclosure has begun.
Right.
No longer can governments ridicule this subject, and I'm quite sure they're concerned, since there's been several low-level overflights, like in Phoenix, for example, in 1997, and the Stephenville thing of early 2008. I think the fact that, at first they denied it, and it was such a ridiculous, ludicrous explanation that they gave, and they've had to realise there's no way they can sit on this all the time. You can fool some of the people all the time.
The thing about the Stevensville case is if you get the MUFON document, and if you were to do a genuine news story about that, with reconstructions, with using some good graphics, etc., and put it across in the media, the way that they do with, say, the Gulf War or something like that, we see it in all, they try and reconstruct it with diagrams. If they did the same on the 10 o'clock news with Stevensville, that would convince everyone.
Yep. You see, I think, I'll give you the reasons why I think a disclosure process has begun. It may not be, what you want, but the fact of the matter is that governments of several countries, France, United Kingdom, Brazil, I think Spain has certainly released a lot of top secret files over the years, and there's a number of other governments too. And this process, as I said earlier, has been accelerated. I was interviewed on ABC News on a primetime program, and they actually quoted me saying some things which quite a few years ago I'm quite sure they would have cut, or they would have made me look foolish. And they're also planning, they're planning a documentary, more documentaries, and I hope to be involved in those. Nick Pope's been involved as well. Also, talking of Nick Pope, in last year's New York Times, he published a long article saying that it's all real. They're here. Some UFOs are ETs. That would not have appeared in the New York Times even 2 years ago, because it's the establishment, one of the main establishment papers in the United States, and they've just never published anything other than ridiculous articles on the subject. They used to publish very serious articles on the subject right up to the 1960s, but so something tells me, and I get the impression from ABC that they're starting to take it all seriously now, and so I think things are moving. They can't sit on this forever.
And what about the Disclosure Project movement and Stephen Greer? And when that event occurred, I mean, was that? Were you aware of it when it? Because I wasn't.
Absolutely, I wanted. Yes, of course, at the press club. In Washington, National Press Club.
I mean, after you saw that, did you think anything was going to come of it then? That it was going to?
Yes, I did. I thought it would help, particularly with some of the people. Yeah. In November 2007, at the National Press Club, when government people and pilots, and I think Edgar Mitchell, astronaut, there were. This was
James Fox organised.
Yes, with Leslie Kean. That was terrific, and that really made people sit up. And I know that because the Washington Times wrote a very, very straight article about it, and I subsequently contacted a journalist, and nobody tried to stop that article.
Right. I spoke to James Fox a few weeks ago, and he's got that's coming out in a movie very soon, I think.
Yes.
So that's kind of
it's good.
About to. I don't know.
Yes, because he's got he organised the filming of it and everything. Yeah.
And it's he's got Jim Peniston in that as well.
Good.
Which was I take it you saw that his description of the Rendlesham.
Yes. Yes.
Craft. I mean, do you think, with regards to Rendlesham, do you think that the Americans were in total control of that incident and perpetrated the cover-up of it?
Of course.
Okay.
What do you expect? You know, twin United States Air Force bases, their nuclear weapons. There were more nuclear weapons stored at Bentwaters at that time than anywhere else in Europe. But Holt said to me, when I interviewed him donkeys years ago about it, he confirmed it all. He said, "It's your country's problem. It took place on UK soil, but the Ministry of Defence ignored me." And of course, as you know now, that they're saying they ignored, they didn't pay any attention to what Holt said, because why did he wait 2 weeks before sending in his report? No, they've been lent on by the Americans. So, I mean, they're still saying, you know, no extraterrestrial craft landed there.
I spoke recently, well, I interviewed recently Gary Heseltine,
Yeah.
who runs the
Yes,
Peace,
yeah.
database. And
Good guy.
he's been looking into, well, he's actually written a script for a film for the Rendlesham Forest case with the agreement of Holt. So he's been working with him on that. So
Excellent.
he's trying
Excellent.
to get that script
Excellent.
into,
Yeah.
into a feature film.
Yeah.
One thing that Gary said while I was interviewing, I asked him about the Disclosure Project, and he said that if he had enough money, he would like to get involved with the British Disclosure, perhaps not Disclosure Project, but Disclosure event, shall we say.
Yes.
Is that something that you would be interested in?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I know Holt.